Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our World IA Cafe Speaker Series. Thank you for joining in today. We have an excellent speaker, and I'm sure this will be an excellent webinar, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. My name is Rupa Mishra. I'm an associate professor at Rutgers University. I manage and teach in the UX design and product design concentrations in the MBS program. I'm also an active member of World IA Association. The topic for today's webinar is what is grassroots AI and why does it matter? I think this is an amazing topic. Everyone is talking about AI. The speaker for this interactive event is Susan Koch, with a background in art, business, and technology. Susan is UX designer and researcher who has focused on social information architecture. Her expertise in these areas allows her to serve as a tech steward, providing valuable advice to businesses on how to leverage small language models. Susan is the founder of 3X Ethical, I love the name, a tech advisory firm started in Blackfoot Territory in Western Canada in 2017. For today's talk, Susan will delve into the field of grassroots AI, its origins, significance, and impact. Beginning with an overview of her expertise and interest in the topic, she will define grassroots AI and highlights its importance in amplifying grassroots movements across various domains. By exploring the intersection of AI technologies with grassroots initiatives, she will illustrate how communities are leveraging AI tools for social change. So do we have, we have Susan's LinkedIn profile link in the chat. Also, I would like you to know that we'll be recording all the speakers in our World IA Cafe Speaker Series. The videos will be available on World IA's website. And let us see if Nihar has the link. I will post the link. So it's a great organization to network and meet people from all over the world. If you're interested, then please join the organization. Every year we host the World IA Day, and this has been going on since 2012. We have Nihar here. She is the coordinator, and she will be very happy to answer your questions if you have any. The format of the Cafe Speaker Series is this: about 45 to 50 minutes is the talk, followed by 10-15 minutes Q&A. So please don't hesitate to ask your questions. Also, I would like to remind you this is a great opportunity to network and meet people. So if you like, you can share your LinkedIn profile link in the chat. I will put mine. Networking is so important. So I will also share my department's website link if anyone is interested in our programs and enjoy the webinar today. Now over to you, Susan.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Rupa Mishra, for this opportunity to speak. And also thank you to the organizers of IA Cafe, especially Grace Law and Nihar Sultana, for helping to get me on board this evening. So as mentioned, I'll be speaking, delving into the burgeoning field of grassroots AI. And I'm going to start by sharing my screen so we can begin to look at my slides. All right, so as mentioned, this talk is on what is grassroots AI and why does it matter? I'll be going through a lot of working definitions and some other topics because I only have 45 minutes, of course, unfortunately, I can't go as deep as I'd like to. I'm going to just touch briefly on each one of these topics due to the constraints and then move on. But as we go through the slides, I've incorporated some QR codes. So if you want to go deeper on something that I'm talking about, they typically link out to an excellent article. So you can have your camera ready. And just a little bit of housekeeping here. A couple of weeks ago, I attended the IAC 2024 conference at the Chief Seattle Library in the Chief Seattle City, United States. And it was a pleasure, of course, to be amongst my American cousins, and especially those who are passionate about how information is arranged for sense making. And on the very first day, I presented my poster, which is actually for poster night. So this is a piece of work on entitled How to Use AI to Mediate Asymmetrical Information Design. And for your information, I will be sharing a few posters that were also at the conference in the room with me and my AI poster, or my IA poster, however you want to look at it, as well as some key slides from the conference, because they're all fresh and relevant to the topic of grassroots AI. And also I will be I'll be following my notes. So if you see me looking down, I'm trying to stay on point and not to get off track. But of course, the foundation of any grassroots movement begins with a relationship to the land on which it takes place. So as much as we might feel that we are all abstract and virtual and about to lose our jobs to artificial intelligence, the last time I checked, I was walking around in my meat suit in downtown Seattle at the public library, carrying a long white tube with a poster rolled up inside. And I can tell you it was a full-on three-dimensional experience that took place on the traditional lands of the Duwamish people, which is the people from which Chief Seattle represented at that period in time, and for which the city is named, if you're not familiar with that. So I begin my talk actually by bigging up First Peoples that I have met along my journey, and I give thanks to the teachings of First Peoples that have been shared with me over the last few decades. Now, here are some photos of real Indigenous people, most of them whom I know, and they're living on their really for real lands. And I show them because at the IAC conference, I got a few questions, and one of them about my poster, and one of them was, do you know any Indigenous people? So in addition to acknowledging the land, I felt it's also a propos to acknowledge the First Peoples, or the peoples. I myself am camped out in Blackfoot territory, and I give thanks to the First Peoples of Turtle Island for their friendship, peace, and hospitality. Now, in before times, I spent about a decade getting to know many First Peoples nations and individuals within those nations. I attended various professional and academic conferences, annual grassroots land-based events like workshops, ceremonies, powwows, and even a few Sundance gatherings. And I first attended as an observer and then as an ally. And then towards the end, I was showing up as a treaty artist. And that's me, by the way, in some of these photos, the one with the white circle over my pale face and the dollar signs in my eyes. Now, there's a funny story about the picture of me in the top left corner of this collection or collage. I'm holding a check for $1 million for the Buffalo Restoration and Food Security Project of the Blackfeet Nation in Montana from the United States of America government, or the US government. It was a grant to the Blackfeet Nation and the local University of Montana to help them restore the buffalo to the Blackfoot territories. As fate would have it, I was in Browning for the annual North American Indian Days in before times. I was invited by a young settler student who had connected me to a Blackfoot counselor, and I was hoping to get some buy-in on the idea of doing some information architecture work for their Buffalo Restoration Project. As soon after I connected, the counselor told me about the $1 million that would be presented to the Blackfoot people in about an hour by representatives from the Department of Indian Affairs at the opening of the evening powwow dance competition. Would you mind, he asked, staying behind to man the booth while we collect our check? Well, of course, I said, for sure, go ahead, collect your check. So it turns out that one of the representatives from the Washington Bureau of Indian Affairs knew about my interest in information architecture, for this counselor had inquired of her as to what information architecture was. And at one point, this rep turned to me and said that they also offered information architecture services. And since I was a foreigner based in Canada, it was clear from that remark that I had been dismissed as being too remote, too obscure, and probably too grassroots. But surprisingly, it turns out that one can go so deep into the fabric of the two cultures, settlers and First Peoples in this instance, in search for common ground, that you end up holding a check for $1 million for a project that is not your own, but somehow connects in a profound way to your sense-making process. And here at the bottom right, you can see another historic event that I was invited to attend on the lands of the Kainai people in Standoff near Lethbridge, Alberta, for their annual buffalo harvest during their EPA, their Environmental Protection Agency land-based event. And I marked the occasion by sketching the experience and then later doing a painting from those sketches. Excuse me. So in the bottom right, you can see a woman in a blue print dress with gray hair leaning over the buffalo. She's actually about to skin or hide the buffalo. And here's the painting I did where she's actually taking the knife and taking off the hide of the buffalo, which later becomes a buffalo robe. So at this point, you're probably asking, well, who is Susan Koch? And as you can see, I have a range of skills along with a lot of experience in specific domains, which cross over nicely. And please feel free to use the QR code if you want to access my website for more information on my tech advisory firm, 3x Ethical, where I advance technology through deliberate values and positive behavior. In 2017, I attended the Information Architecture Conference in Vancouver, Canada, and I was blown away by the keynote speech given by Alan Cooper, author of the book, The Inmates Are Running the Asylum, Why High-Tech Products Drive Us Crazy and How to Restore the Sanity. So at the end of his talk, Mr. Cooper asked us to consider deeply who we're working for and why. And this challenge inspired me. And after some reflection and being so ethical, I decided to start my own company along with a 20% project in 2018. And having taken a vow of poverty in art school, the price for not selling out and pursuing art for art's sake was always some sort of moral high ground, provided, of course, that you could find a job to grind away at while continuing to play the infinite game of making art. So I reasoned that I could learn more about the art of arranging social information by working on a personal passion project than by constantly searching for that non-existent remote UX job or chasing clients who are not interested in social information architecture and the role that ethics plays in technology. So I created the Two-Row Flow Cultural Commons as a conceptual container for all things related to relationships with First Peoples. And this is actually the home page of the placeholder website. You can check it out at Two-Row Flow, www.tworowflow.com. And as you can see, the role of language in the affairs of both settlers and First Peoples is the first thing that's acknowledged at this website. It's also important to note that there is a distinct difference between the finite and the infinite games being played by each treaty partner that are similar to the ones that we all play or we all experience in our social, economic, political, and financial lives on a daily basis. So the definition here of finite games versus infinite is that finite games are defined as having known players, fixed rules, and agreed upon objective, whereas the infinite game is defined as known and unknown, and the rules are changeable, and the objective is not to win. The objective is to simply keep playing the game. Oops, sorry, I'm just trying to move this out of the way so I could go to the next, moving it around so I can actually read my screen there. Thanks. So yes, this is after 7 years of starting my personal project, which I worked on consistently for about 2 to 4 hours a day, there suddenly emerged a viable solution to balance the asymmetrical information that I had seen or found or noted between settlers and First Peoples, also did UX studies. And it emerged through artificial intelligence in general and small language models specifically. So again, here we see in this quote, interesting fact that when you pit a finite player against a finite player, the system is stable. But when you pit an infinite player against an infinite player, it's also stable. However, the problems arise when you pit a finite player against an infinite player. The finite player again is playing to win, and the infinite player is just playing to simply keep playing. As a result, they make very different strategic choices. And if you want to go deep on that, there's a great book about finite and infinite games by James P. Carse. Now, here's a screenshot for the peacemakerAI.net website, which is the solution that I found through personal AI. If you want to go there, you can learn more about this project. Now, the biggest lesson that I learned from First Peoples over the last decade is the importance of cultivating what is known as right relationship with all things. And in this photo, we see a Blackfoot woman, a friend of mine named Rebecca Many Gray Horses, who I first met at a settler job site over a decade ago. And she's beside a teepee, which belonged to her 4 times great-great-grandfather, Chief Red Crow. And the teepee is painted with his design. So that's not his original teepee, but as a knowledge keeper, these designs are passed down. So that is the design that was on his teepee. And he signed the Treaty 7 agreement with European settlers in the late 1800s. So I've learned a lot about Rebecca's famous ancestor, as well as her Blackfoot culture over the past decade. Rebecca is known as a knowledge keeper and often speaks at the Galt Museum in Lethbridge, Alberta on various topics related to her culture. Now, ironically, I also have an ancestor who was famous or is famous and who lived around the same time. That's the important fact, as the Chief Red Crow. My ancestor did not live in Blackfoot territory on Turtle Island, however, but rather in Europe, in Bavaria, Germany. And his name is Dr. Robert Herbert Koch. He is my 4-time great-great-grandfather around the same time period. And he won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work on tuberculosis viruses, the TB viruses, and also is considered to be the father of modern medicine. So take note of the fact modern. As an artist, I've studied all the areas of art, including modern art, and now we have the word modern medicine. But I was so impressed by this little tidbit of knowledge, which literally took decades to confirm. It had been in my head for a long time, and then fact check. So deep are the secrets amongst my family that I included him in a poster that I presented in the 2021 Virtual Information Architecture Conference in an effort to make sense of the world at that point in time. And the poster that I presented was entitled The State of the Two-Row Flow Commons in the Time of COVID. Sadly, it did not appeal to the online audience that evening. In fact, I've never seen a group of people less interested in my work on mapping alternative cultures of medicine through history while referencing a current biological/social event. Apparently, there was only one form of medicine that counted in that online space, and it was, well, you guessed it, modern medicine, the medicine of my grandfather, great-great-grandfather. So since I've always identified as a European and feel that for the most part, I'm a stranger in a strange land, camped out in British colonies on stolen lands in Blackfoot territories, the reaction actually didn't faze me too much. Now, this is my poster that I presented at the AIC 24. It was on display in an in-person event at the Seattle Public Library last month. And at that time, my poster was hard to escape as it was in a rather small room on a golden easel in front of an architecturally designed window with very good lighting overhead. And also, since AI is a thing, artificial intelligence, even if the desire to balance out asymmetrical information is not at this point, my poster did attract attention. The 2 favored words that were used to describe my work that evening were fresh and photogenic. Now, naturally, my work is informed by my first calling as a visual artist and my training at the Emily Carr College of Art and Design, which is now a university. And this training as an artist set me up for success in this domain. I feel after 5 years of formal studies in art and new media, I was well prepared for the challenge of designing intelligent information landscapes in these times. As far back as 1998, 4 decades ago, I was already tracking information architecture thanks to the MIT Press and their magazine Leonardo, which is still active today. And it was there that I encountered a few lines on information that really rocked my world and led me to a strange desire to work and play with information. And the quote was, "Today, many of these artists are more interested in managing information or arranging information than they are in formulating unique forms of individual expression." So I just want to zoom out a bit here now so I can share a few things that I've learned over the past 4 decades at the intersection of art, business, and technology in my pursuit of becoming a practitioner of information architecture. Of course, desire is a given. My passion for my work fuels actually the ideas and concepts that keep me awake at night. But here are my top 3 takeaways. So the first one is, as an artist, being comfortable with chaos is a must. Making a mess and creating something from it, or cleaning up a mess that someone else made with their information and then dealing with all the chaos associated to rearranging that are, I would say, similar in kind. The second thing that I've learned is always to seek the deep beauty of a thing and not just be attracted to the surface of it. As the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie said to the United Nations in 1963, when he spoke about war and the peaceful survival of mankind, quote, "Until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, there will always be war." And last but not least, I advise you, especially if you're new to this field and a student, to play the infinite game. Now, being an artist at heart and a total fool for information, I was thrilled to see that these two posters at the IAC conference, created by tech students from my old art school, now turned university, which was named after a British painter, no less, a woman known as Emily Carr, who also camped out on Indigenous lands, specifically those in the unceded territories of the Pacific West Coast in so-called British Columbia, where she painted under the influence of Indigenous culture. And this one of the posters by the Emily Carr students is focused on decolonizing knowledge systems, which could be code for cultivating right relationship. So my desire to decolonize AI is also total. And I love to see this type of work. It's considered work by young art students who are, I guess, sort of alumni. And this is the other poster, which was on fake news and misinformation. And while our terms differ, as my poster is focused on the concept of asymmetrical information by design, and not on the variations of a theme known as mis, mal, or disinformation, both of our posters are aligned on the importance of ethics in stewarding technology. Whether it's life or death or war or peace, social information architecture and the way that it is, or social information and the way that it's architected matters. And we can see this in the definition that McLuhan puts forth on the role of the artist. First of all, the artist is considered the antenna of the race. I think that was Proust that put that forth. But McLuhan saw that the artist is the person who invents the means to bridge between the biological inheritance and the environments created by technological innovation. And that was around 1988 that he put that forth. Now, ironically, my pitch to the founder of Personal AI on my peacemakerai.net project was entitled Bridging the Divide, leveraging personal language models, also known as small language models, to cultivate right relationship on Turtle Island. And during that pitch to the CEO of Personal AI, Suman Kandaganji, I explained the concept behind peacemakerai.net. I explained how I saw using personal AI as a viable solution to cultivating right relationship with First Peoples. And at peacemakerai.net, Indigenous thought leaders train their own AI on their ways, customs, and laws in accordance with treaty agreements. And settlers can then query their AIs with the intent of having a mediated conversation with an Indigenous trained peacemaker AI. This will reduce the cognitive load of Indigenous thought leaders, and specifically, and First Peoples in general, who have better things to do with their time than constantly having to update and educate settlers whose respective governments have failed to do so when it comes to their ways, customs, and laws in order to achieve better understanding. So the 4 different groups that would be invited to participate in training their own AIs include Indigenous academics, professionals, creatives, and grassroots thought leaders. Now, I call myself a social information architect because I soon discovered that the problem I was trying to solve with technology was a seemingly impossible one, and no one believed that it could actually be solved, of course, unless, of course, Indigenous peoples or First Peoples were guiding and governing the solution. But this type of problem, like other wicked social issues, including race, religion, politics, war, hunger, and environment, are social by nature and deeply embedded in culture and cultures. So the difference between the two forms of information architecture is found in their inputs and or their focus and their inputs. And for information architecture in general, the focus is on transactions, while with social IA, art remains a big influence because creativity is an infinite game that everybody wants to play. And that's everybody. Like we see the banning of TikTok in America now, where you know, a lot of creative people were playing and also maybe making some sort of income. But some people say that the role of humans is to be creative, that is our fundamental role. But then that leads me to the big old philosophical question about what is art. Here's probably the most cosmic answer or definition that I know, which is based on a formula, which is time factored by energy equals art. In other words, everything is shaped by time is art. And then, of course, we refer back to a quote by McLuhan. The most culturally relevant definition for me is the one that McLuhan says when he says culture is our business, and warns us or says that art at its most significant is a distant early warning system that can always be relied on to tell old culture what is beginning to happen. So McLuhan is constantly, he is a Canadian media theorist. For those who want to know more, he wrote a book called The Laws of Media, many other books as well, but he basically sums up the role of the artist as having to, the role is to update consciousness. So he's constantly reminding us that the role is basically one of upsetting or disturbing the status quo. And after all, art is everywhere, always reminding us of this or that social issue. And while doing UX research on public transit for an online course offered by an American university, I saw these posters at various bus stops in Lethbridge, Alberta, and did a double take, for they were created by an artist-run center or a collective. So I had to stop and say to myself, well, is this art or is this UX research? But you know, the involvement of social movements and art have been intertwined. The relationship between those two for pretty much forever. History shows us that time and time again, what good bedfellows artists and activists make. And these are some examples of recent social movements that took place on the ground, but were tethered like big red balloons to the cloud services of this or that social network. And while we can throw various labels and classifications at each one of these movements, no doubt it is clear to, probably clear to all of you who are attending this talk, and again, thanks for attending, depending on your worldview, that they include the entire spectrum of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Speaking of ugly, the trucker protests in Canada got particularly nasty over the vaccination mandates. This in spite of the fact that a little over 100 years ago, and Canada is only about 156 years old, or since its incorporation, the subjects of the British Crown, including many British settlers in Canada and America, mocked the very idea of vaccinations. And while at the same time in Germany, under the watch of my 4 times great-great-grandfather, Vaccines were being mandated for the very first time. So imagine that, such division of thinking among Europeans, and both of them happening at the same time. So it does seem that there is a long, strange history of anti-vaccination movements. And of course, these movements have evolved over time and have adopted various forms of media as tools to support their causes. And why, you may ask? Well, as my former instructor, Andreas Rasmini, a professor in Sweden, stated in this slide from his presentation on the classification of, or the politics of classification, excuse me, he said, making sense is a social process. And in this social process, which stands in stark contrast to what I call big tech AI and its relentless desire for transactions over transformation, with big tech AI, we find the politics of classification. And we can see the impact that they're having on our societies as a result of the design of social networks, most recently, as the sort of ultimate surveillance platforms. But while most settlers continue to fight over property rights and are at war in Europe and the Middle East for this very same reason, First Peoples struggled to retain the memory of their culture. I'm just going to move this aside here. Yeah. So, of course, it turns out that memory is a big deal. And this was pointed out by a great European author in his book, The Book of Laughter and Forgetting. And this book actually influenced me greatly, when I was in art school. And I want to read this quote here. The first step in liquidating a people is to erase its memory, destroy its books, its culture, its history, and then have somebody write new books, manufacture a new culture, invent a new history. Before long, that nation will begin to forget what it is and what it was. The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. So while many of us may think that the definition of grassroots is assigned to those who defend the memories of their ancestors, the original word lies with American settlers who used the phrase grassroots and boots to indicate that they were connected to the soil of the people. This was indeed only through the soil on the bottom of their boots. How ironic this relationship must sound to First Peoples, who are the original grassroots peoples of Turtle Island, many who have died singing their death song while defending their lands with their moccasins pointed straight up to the sky. So the morphing of land-based social movements into new keywords that can be appropriated is traced back to the game, of course, of semantics and the language in Europe, starting with the commons in the 12th century, and then the birth of collectives and cooperatives in the 17th century, and then on to the use of the term grassroots in the early 20th century, which by the 21st century had become fully aligned with Indigenous peoples. European settlers, it turns out, had taken a fork in the road and become hippies in the 1960s, calling for love over land and dropping into a psychedelic Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole from which many have yet to emerge. But in 2021, First Peoples hit a semantic snag due to the escalating war in the Middle East. And they were no longer known as the noble land defenders that they rightfully are. Instead, they were labeled as terrorists. So the search for first principles in technology is not unique to philosophy. All great thinkers do it. In fact, a sports coach playing a finite game will reason from first principles. The rules of football are the first principles. They govern what you can do and what you can't do. So I chose to create Commons as an as an intelligent information landscape in which to cultivate right relationship on Turtle Islands. The concept of the Commons represents one of the oldest European forms of land-based cooperation based on creativity, collaboration, and critical thinking. So now, what are the characteristics of grassroots social movements? Well, to start, the movements are bottom up and not top down, which means you start with little or nothing and work your way up into the consciousness of the status quo. And you can use lots of hashtags if you're on X or Twitter to help you give a broader understanding of what it is that your movement stands for. Now, but you do not start out as a Google employee, make 200 grand a year for a few years and then spin off a cool AI startup and claim that you represent grassroots AI. No, sorry, you represent enterprise AI at its best, and that is big tech AI is representative of enterprise AI. And there's another distinction where grassroots AI differs from enterprise AI, and it's the way that those who follow it reason or make sense. So grassroots AI is much closer to indigenous ways of thinking and reasoning due to its love of complexity and trans-contextual domains. And this is shown in two books by indigenous authors, one by an indigenous woman who wrote about indigenous wisdom and scientific knowledge, and the other by an indigenous man who actually studied European systems thinking and then compared it to the teachings of his indigenous ancestors from Australia. Tyson points out the distinction between European systems thinking and grassroots indigenous thinking is this, that the European systems are complicated as they're tied to machines and arising from the Industrial Revolution for the most part. Take example for a plumbing system in your house, it is complicated, while living systems deal with complexity and multiple contexts at one time, like the role of your gut microbiome in regulating your immune system, for example. So the bottom line, of course, is that when it comes to grassroots thinking, it is the interconnectedness of things which matters, and which First Peoples focus on relationships, kin, and living systems, and the Europeans tend to focus on the emergence and synthesis associated with systems thinking and their approaches to sense making. Now, here's a great quote from a systems thinker, an American environmental scientist, author, educator, and writer, Donella Meadows. As it relates to systems thinking and the role of the virus on your immune system, her observation is that it takes the right conditions for a virus to flourish. So this way of looking at the world is largely ignored by Eurocentric, uber-specific scientific cultures, which remain for the most part locked into various modes of linear thinking in order to play the finite game of politics with its hard and fast rules in governing for commerce. Now, according to systems thinking, when the conditions are right, the thing will arise. So as we've seen with the rise of generative AI in the last year, 2023, the conditions were perfect for generative AI to emerge in the form of ChatGPT. And of course, it took the world by storm. And now, thanks to artificial intelligence, information architects and UXers are all having to rethink what they know about algorithms, data, and models of learning. But I soon hope that the information architecture community will add the concept of warm data to their ways of thinking about information, as it helps to distinguish between complicated and complex systems. And since Indigenous ways and worldviews are well-versed in peacemaking through treaties, they have a brilliant way of bringing together two diverse cultures or two diverse ways of seeing the world, which is known as two-eyed seeing, literally. A biological connection embedded in the body experience. So at one point, while working on various designs for the Commons, I designed an online course called Social UX for Indigenous Youth, in which two-eyed seeing would have been the framework. And during this process, I managed to find a Indigenous UX designer online who said, quote, "UX is the perfect intersection of media, culture, and technology." Now, here's a good example of grassroots thinking, which is not, I don't think, enabled by AI as of yet, but it has to do with food security. In this case, we're talking about the elk in northern BC, and there's a QR code if you want to read the full article. And here's another link to my YouTube channel where I did a 45-minute talk comparing the grassroots thinking from a 2018 paper called Making Kin with Machines, written by 4 Indigenous new media students in Montreal, Canada. And I compared that to the rise of grassroots AI in South Africa. Now, while traveling to Seattle, I picked up a Wired magazine at the newsstand and read this story about the invention of modern AI. So here we have 3 times modern art, modern medicine, and now we're talking about modern AI, which was a new term for me. But according to the article, it all began with transformers, which, by the way, is a deep learning architecture developed by Google, which was proposed in this 2017 paper called "Attention is All You Need." And from this paper, this quote was the one that I love the most, which is transformers did not instantly take over the world or even Google. Kaiser recalls that around the time of the paper's publication, Shazier proposed to Google executives to abandon the search index and to train a huge network with transformers, basically to transform how Google organizes information. Wow. So yeah, that was about 7 years ago. So that passage really got my attention as it alerts us to the new ways that information, well, it alerts us to the fact that the way we organize information will never be the same. And begs the question again, where did grassroots AI arise from? Because if modern AI is in full effect, according to Wired, and in the form of large language models and enterprise AI, then where did grassroots AI come from? So my research on this grassroots AI concept, I find 3 possible locations, and this sequence of events makes the most sense to me. So by my calculations and timelines, the concept of grassroots AI emerged from South Africa, from technology students in particular, and became a thing just recently, so probably over the last 2 to 5 years. But we can see in this opening to this article, amid South Africa's perfect storm of few universities, racial inequalities, and economic disparities, AI students find support in a not so grassroots movement. So that's a mouthful, not so grassroots movement. I'm trying to define grassroots, and then the author throws in the not so grassroots for you to think about. So again, another reference to grassroots AI comes from India in the form of a corporate website offering AI services. And if you go to their website, you'll see in their menu that they offer not only enterprise AI, but also grassroots AI. And if you dig a little deeper, here's an article on their website, Building the Future of AI Through Localized and Grassroots Development. And basically, they have a picture here of African tech students. And also, if you dig into the text, there is reference to ethics. So ironically, the founder of Personal AI was born and raised in India, and he studied computer science as a student in India. In effect, Suman represents the grassroots people of India, as far as I'm concerned, because his goal with Personal AI is to empower billions of people with their own AIs. And if you read his thesis at Personal AI on memory, it's quite significant as well. So, and of course, there's a third party involved, as there would be with Europe and its relations over time with the colonizing of India and Africa. But they are all up in arms, and they are actually calling, the European Union is calling out, urging that the grassroots AI be protected, the research for grassroots AI be protected in order to risk out losing to the United States. So clearly they see a threat here from enterprise AI or modern AI, however you want to label it. But then the next question is, how does grassroots AI differ from enterprise AI? And well, we know that it's dominated by big technology with big media and big government. We also know from the history of social, and we know this from the history of social networks like Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit. But with grassroots AI, the transformation lies in the difference lies in the transformation through love, which is the neuroreceptors, the chemicals, biological chemicals, as opposed to a technological transformer technology, which places it, in my opinion, squarely in the domain of social information architecture. And that QR code, again, goes to my talk on YouTube with the paper on making kin with machines, very significant paper. But this is also a slide that I got from the IA conference, and in an attempt to define grassroots AI from this slide, all these nice categories, 7 different categories. It's generative AI is the category that grassroots AI uses the most. And so when I map these out side by side, you can see that There are 6 categories, mostly back end for enterprise AI and 1 front end, which is generative AI, which of course, enterprise AI will also use generative AI, but not necessarily the other way around, with generative AI being more of a appealing to creatives, to grassroots. Obviously, businesses have sales and marketing people, creatives, and even UX now is being lumped into that camp. So with generative AI, it's largely text-based, which also makes it more accessible for the entire world. Then you can add in images, audio, and video, getting larger files and sizes. But nevertheless, it's a perfect solution for creatives, grassroots, academics, and professionals to use in their personal and professional lives. And of course, it's modeled, or it's built on the idea of neural networks, which mimic the human brain. And the brain loves pattern recognition and synthesis. So, there is an affinity there in that architectural build. But when we look at small language models, personal AI is a generative AI model. It's not a large language model. Rather, it is a foundational small language model with the aim to restore the power of AI to the people. And if we get technical here, the difference between small and large language models is that small language models are trained on the data from specific domains. They may lack holistic contextual information from all multiple knowledge domains, but are likely to excel in their chosen domain, which, most people are aspiring, if they have their own knowledge base, or their business has a knowledge base, or their organization, to be very specific, to be very focused on their own knowledge and not necessarily the whole world. And yeah, does that include Indigenous peoples? Typically not. So it's not really the whole world anyhow. It's pretty impossible to achieve that. But with personal AI, we say that our small language model is 40 times better than a large language model. And if you want to learn more about that, you can always book a Zoom with me and I can present more. There's a QR code to scan. I can give you a demo and show you more. But personal AI, as far as I'm concerned, is the ultimate grassroots tool. And thanks to the 3 smart, sophisticated, and warm co-founders who are open to different ways of thinking. They actually were among the first to show some love for my personal project, peacemakerai.net. And for that, I'm very grateful. Because I do have these objectives of trying to, create this personal or peacemakerai.net powered by personal AI, supported by settlers and adopted by First Peoples. So finally, or in closing, please remember this quote. That the minute you have senior executives obsessing about the short game, the game is lost. And that comes from Simon Sinek, who's the master of start with why approach to strategic thinking. And finally, how can you do, or what can you do to support grassroots AI should you stumble upon it in your studies and in your life journey? Well, I recommend that you practice the law of network effects, share your knowledge, expand your networks, and always, always practice compassion and love. So thank you for your time. And if you have some questions, I guess you can queue up now, or you can always find me on LinkedIn or on my website.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for the wonderful talk. You covered so many things, from Alan Cooper, the book, The Inmates Are Running the Asylum. I read the book. I have it here. Wonderful book. Mark McLuhan, I have his book. Great. And Simon Sinek, right? Let's start with why. Wonderful video for everyone attending. Please do watch his video. And he gives the example of Apple. Thank you once again, Susan, for the wonderful talk. And thank you, everyone, for joining in and attending this event. Good night. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. All the best.